Hey, everybody. Welcome to Bound by Grace podcast. Grief doesn't follow a script. I think that's very important. So I'm going to repeat that. Grief doesn't follow a script. It doesn't arrive politely or leave on schedule. It's messy, sacred, and deeply human. In this honest and healing episode of Bound by Grace, we're joined by Troy Whitman, a certified mental health coach, speaker, and host of Rooted for Growth podcast. He provides a compassionate guide for those navigating the shadows of loss. Together, we will explore what grief really looks like beyond cliche and timelines, the emotional and neurological impact of loss, how faith and mental health can work together in the healing process, and practical ways to support someone who is grieving, and how to be gentle with yourself in your own grief. Troy brings wisdom, empathy, and spiritual insight to a topic we all face but often struggle to talk about. Whether you're grieving as a person, you're grieving a relationship, you're grieving a season of life, or even a version of yourself, you'll find comfort and clarity in this conversation because grief may change us, but it doesn't have to undo us. And with grace, we can learn to carry it well. How are you doing today? I am so thankful that you were able to make it on.
Thanks, Amber. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm a little tired. I have my coffee. You'll see me drinking. Um, and hopefully no one gets offended, but I vape in the mornings to wake myself up. And so I might hit that a couple times. But I'm really looking forward to this episode. We are doing for our listeners more of a Q&A style. But again, if the spirit leads in a different direction and has him lay something on his heart to share further, I want you to go with it. It'll end up being a conversational style, and that is fine. So we'll start with our first one. Can you share a moment that captures the early days of your grief, something that helped you feel the weight of what you'd lost?
It's interesting. I've been trying to journal a lot about my grief and about those first few days after losing my wife. So, just so that everyone knows, I lost my wife suddenly at the beginning of October of 2024. Um, it was not anything diagnosed. I feel like it was actually a little bit of a gift that that she was taken so suddenly, because sometimes when you have a long process of um, disease or illness, that can just be super traumatic over a lot of months. So mine was very fast, but the unfortunate side of that is I had to process it very quickly. It all happened so fast. So in those moments, the thing that really sticks out to me the most is they're in the emergency room, when they brought me back with my daughter, who had just gotten there. She lives about 30 minutes away from me. She had just gotten to the waiting room when the doctor came and asked for us to come back. I hadn't seen my wife since the paramedics took her out of my house about an hour and a half before. We came back to the emergency room, and there was a machine that was hooked to her chest that was pumping her chest. Um, and the nurse looked at me and said, "There's nothing else we can do."
Mm.
And I looked, and the machine is still going. The machine is still working. But it dawned on me in that moment that all of the workers were just lining the walls. Half of them were kind of staring down. Um, and that's when it hit me. Like they knew in that moment what I was just now starting to realize, that she's gone. And they said, "I'm sorry, we're going to have to take the machine off." Um, And in that moment, just this guttural cry came from myself and from my daughter, where just it, it's unbelievable. I've never liked hospitals, and I've never wanted to be in the medical profession, and it's that moment is the reason why, because
Mhm.
that such a terrible loss like that. Over the days that happened afterwards, I was walking through a fog, really. And I remember this one point, I was in my backyard taking my dog outside. It was dark. The skies were full of stars, and I remember saying, like, God, I can't I can't do this without her. That was the moment when it really hit me. Like, my entire life up to right then was built around this relationship that I had with my wife and the daughter that we had raised, the life that we were creating, the expectation of the life that was coming over the next several years, and all of that. Life as we knew it just stopped, and I didn't know how to proceed. That was that moment when it was real to me.
Mm. How did your view of grief, how did it change after walking through it yourself compared to what you knew, well, what you know now as a mental health coach?
The the surprising thing in my history leading up to that point, I had been a part of a few men's groups in leadership capacities, leading some group counseling for men specifically. But as part of
Mhm,
that training for leadership, I actually trained through a group called Grief Share and how to facilitate Grief Share, which is a program that's run through some Christian churches. It's like a 12-week program of videos that helps people who are grieving, and I was trained as a counselor, a facilitator of that type of program. And I'd been trained for that for maybe 3 years before my wife passed. So it's interesting that once she did pass, I was able to recall some of those trainings that I had done with Grief Share, and I understood the process that I was going to go through in grief. And what really helped me through that is that I knew I couldn't just sit and let
mhm,
everything crumble around me. Now, that's not everybody. You have to process grief in your own way. That's one thing that I've always heard, and I say now is everyone processes grief differently.
mhm.
And so when you're in that moment, you do what is best for you in that moment to help you deal with the waves of grief that's happening. But for me, I knew that I couldn't sit in this empty house by myself because it was just not going to be good for me and my personality. So I ended up the very next Wednesday after she passed away, I was in church that night for the Wednesday night service. It was incredibly hard, and I knew it was going to be hard. But I also knew that whenever I went back, it was going to be hard. So I'd rather go ahead and get that out of the way and be around the people who loved me and was there to protect me. So as I look back on how I took those steps of grief, I realized that I was prepared, perhaps maybe a little bit more than maybe an average person was, but I still had to process through it in my own way, and that's okay. That's all right to do.
Yeah. Um, were there things that people said or did that felt helpful or unintentionally hurtful during your loss?
I'm sure that there was a lot of things that was said at the funeral, and I don't recall them all. It was just a blur to me.
Mhm,
But specifically on this, my daughter had an actual great story with this. She left the funeral actually angry. There was a person from church, and looking back on it, I'm sure it was completely not intended this way.
mhm,
But as they came up to her, they said to her, "You know, your dad's really going to need a lot of support. So you might want to see about coming to church with him and coming to Sunday school with him because he's really going to be lost over these next little bit." Well, that was said in a caring way for myself, but my daughter was left feeling, I'm hurt, I'm lost too. So
yeah,
it's one of those things that I don't know that anybody is saying anything intentionally to, hurt the other individual, but it might take when you're dealing with somebody who is deep in grief like this, it might take just an extra second to analyze what you're going to say and try to question, is there any way that somebody could perceive this the wrong way, or try to put yourself in that person's shoes, even though it's really 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 hard to do that. Try to think about what they're going through and then think, how would they react if they were to receive the message that you were going to give them.
As a mental health coach, do you have any advice for people that happen to know of someone going through grief, what they could say or do that is most helpful? Because sometimes you can't say anything. Um, but what is your professional opinion on that?
You know, words are hard when it comes to
Mm,
grief.
yeah.
Words tend to fall flat. Even the most well-intentioned words just lack something when grief is in the room. The best thing to do if you are really caring for somebody and they are grieving is to just be with them, just to
Mhm.
visit with them, just to sit with them, let them know that you're there. Let them know that if they want to talk about their loved one, you're there to talk about them. If they just want to sit in silence, that's okay too. If they just want to pray, if they want to get their mind off of it and laugh, just let them know that you're there to support them in whatever way that they need that support. Because that's what's truly most important when somebody's grieving, is to know that I'm not here by myself under this little black cloud. I have other people that's there with me, that's willing to put their arm around me, cry with me, laugh with me, talk with me, whatever is needed.
Yeah, I went through my own grieving process as well with my loss of my daughter. I had a stillborn at 35 weeks, and no one could say anything. The words did just fall flat. And sometimes I knew that they meant well, but it almost irked me to hear, I'm sorry. So for me, if I could go back and verbalize what I really needed, I needed someone to sit with me in silence. I did, just to feel like I was not alone. So that's probably the perfect advice that you could give. I will say my sister did show up, and I had children at the time. She showed up and she did meals for me for a week, like just showed up with meals. And that was very helpful. That just
That
made it where one thing was off my plate.
Yeah, that type of support is extremely helpful. All of covering your physical needs so that you don't have to think about those things. That is very important. And that's what honestly a lot of churches, a lot of Sunday schools, things like that, they get that right because they'll do a meal train or they'll take food over,
Yeah.
and that's fine. That's wonderful. The downside of receiving those types of meals is that they usually come to an end. Like, it'll be really good for a week or 2 weeks or whatever the case might be, but as those meals start to stop, because people go back to their regular lives, making a meal for somebody else is not a normal part of their life plan. So when they go back to their regular lives, the person dealing with grief, there's like another layer of grief that comes on in that moment, another layer of sadness, because now they have to battle that voice in their head that's saying, okay, well, has everybody forgotten that I'm still dealing
Mm,
with this? As everybody goes on with their lives, I'm still stuck here dealing with this loss. This house is still empty. Nobody's now coming with anything, to show me. And that was a nice sign. But now you start to feel actually resentment towards some of those folks, because you're like, were they just doing that because it was part of a list? Were they doing it out of obligation? Or do they really care, about me? A lot of negative thoughts come into your head when you're dealing with that process of grief.
yeah, I could see that happening for sure. Um, yeah, I think my thought process would lean into, were they doing it out of selfishness, like to make themselves feel better that they
Right.
did something. Um, so I can see where that would come into play. Let's see here. No, you touched on that. What are some internal conflicts that grievers often experience that don't get talked about enough?
One of the things I think that grievers deal with is how the loss really changes your lives in ways that you don't expect.
Mhm.
So obviously people are going to think, okay, well, the person's not there anymore. And that's going to be the hardest part. And yes, that is the hardest part. But there's other um, outside activities, outside things of just that one individual that now your life is affected differently that you have to adjust to. For me specifically, me and my wife were really had a lot of fun playing board games. Love playing board games. We would do that probably a couple of times a week, even if it's just us. We'd play a two-player board game just as a way to connect and just have fun and relax for the evening. It was just a wonderful, wonderful time.
Yeah.
Well, when my wife passed, I went through this whole process of, am I really going to have somebody else to play board games with? Um, and I'm going to have to find two other people or three other people or whatever that magic number is to make some of these games work that I really enjoy playing, that I love playing with my wife. Are there some that I love playing with her that I'm ever going to play again because it
Mhm.
was such a special time that me and her had? Um,
Yeah.
and then even more so than that, um, I wanted to get out of the house. I wanted to go do things. And so my options were I was either going to go and sit by myself at a restaurant and eat by myself, which is a big change, or I was going to go out with a friend. And the problem with me going out with a friend is usually most of my friends are married. So I would have to go out with my friend and his wife. And so that's a strange combination. Or my friend might say, "Hey, let's go out to dinner." Well, that's wonderful, but I know, being in the capacity I'm in, and being so involved in men's lives and they're growing together with their wife and building that relationship. The idea of taking a man out of his house to spend time with me away from his family when his family is there, that didn't sit well with me. Even though I knew it was coming from a friend standpoint, I didn't feel good about going out to dinner with a friend of mine who's married, knowing that his wife and his kids might be at home just waiting for him, and he's out of the house. So it changes those dynamics of, me and my wife used to go out to eat with a couple, or me and my wife used to play games with a couple, and now you're having to change. Okay, this has changed my entire social life altogether. And that's not the things you think of immediately. You just think of the loss, but it affects so many other areas.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Um, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you went through that change. When did you start seeing acceptance? Or maybe I'll go off of this question. How have you found healing to be, have you found it more to be about acceptance, action, or something else entirely?
I think it's something else entirely. There is a little bit of acceptance.
Mhm.
Um, every morning, when you lose a spouse, every single morning, there is this brief moment as soon as you wake up where you don't remember that they're gone.
Mhm.
And every single morning, for that couple of seconds, you realize, oh, she is gone. And a little wave of grief hits you again. So with that comes acceptance. You know that that's going to happen. Every morning, you know that's going to happen. And then you get to the point where the time that you're in that grief as soon as you wake up is shorter and shorter. And that's part of the acceptance. There's a healing with it as well, and there's the ultimate healing. I use a capital H in that healing, that
Mhm.
you know where she is. So that helps you to try not to be as down or to be stuck in grief as much, because you know where she is, and you know if she had the choice, she wouldn't come back, and I wouldn't want her to come back knowing
Mhm.
what she's experiencing right now.
Mhm.
So that's a little bit of healing through that acceptance as well. But it's just dealing with it day after day. It starts to get easier, but she's always in everything that I do. She's there, and so now it's more about accepting the fact that she's not physically here, but her memories will always be here, and I have to bring those along with me and incorporate those into my life as I continue to move forward and go on to another chapter.
And again, if I get too invasive, you just let me know and we will direct it somewhere else.
Sure.
Um, did you, since it was so unexpected, did you have a moment where you felt guilt or anger or like what was that like for you? I understand that you had a moment of basically wailing in grief. Um, Probably didn't even recognize that noise was coming from you. But afterwards, when you really realized what was going on, what were the thoughts and how did you cry out to God? Was it in anger? What take us through that?
Yeah. I remember, I remember being very scared in that moment when the paramedics were coming, when they were taking her in, and then when they declared her. I went through this whole process in my mind of thinking, "Did I do something wrong?"
Mhm.
Not in a biblical sense or my relationship with God, but physically, did I do something
Yes.
wrong?
Yes.
Um, so as she was in the moment of it happening, and I was calling 911, and I started the CPR process, and I started to do all of these things, I remember thinking, "Am I doing this right?" Like,
Mm,
I've known it enough to do it, so I have no doubt that I was performing the function the best that I could. But I had questions about, like, should I be doing this right now? Like, is this only like if her heart is fully stopped? Have I checked to make sure that her heart is fully stopped? Like, there's all these things that started coming through my mind of, did I do something wrong that caused her to not be savable when she got to the hospital?
mm,
And that was a lot of I had a lot of guilt over that for a couple of days. Um, and I mean, it was after, medical examinations and everything else came back that, I mean, I come to realize there's nothing I could have done, right or wrong. There's nothing I could have done to change the outcome. So that's a little bit of relief in that. But I remember I was very guilt stricken for a while to think, "W- what if what if I did something wrong? Or maybe I should have been more well prepared for this process." And even in the weeks and months afterwards, I remember thinking, so she passed away due to a heart condition. It was basically a heart attack. And I remember thinking afterwards, okay, well, it's just me now for my daughter. And I have to do what's best to make sure that I'm as healthy as possible for her sake, so that I could die tomorrow, but my death will not be something that I could have prevented, whether it be through eating or exercise or whatever. So I went on this journey of doing better about eating, better about exercise. And I started seeing some great weight loss and all this other stuff. And I was enjoying myself of fixing these really nice meals that were healthy. And then another wave of guilt came because it was like, why didn't I do this 3 or 4 years ago? You know, why maybe if we would have gotten this active in this 3 or 4 years ago, this wouldn't have happened. So there's waves of that guilt that comes by. And it's almost like you have this season where everything is good and your acceptance is there and you're healing through this process, and then another round of guilt comes in for some way, and I truly believe it's an attack from the enemy,
it
just
absolutely
trying to
is.
yeah, just trying to chip away at this new life that you're building.
Yeah, I completely agree. I understand that guilt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what role did your faith play during the grieving process? Were there moments of doubt, hope, or divine comfort that stand out?
um so I remember in the hospital, I called a really good friend of mine who I've been close with for years, and he's a pastor. And he had, like, it was midnight, and he gets there to the hospital, and he had such words of encouragement for myself, for my daughter, for, my wife's family that was all there. Just such moments of comfort. I can't even recall everything that he said, but I felt like the Holy Spirit was just surrounding us in that moment and protecting
Mm,
us. And then I remember the days afterward thinking, Lord, if I'm going to make it through this, I need your strength.
mhm,
And in those moments, someone would show up. a brother that I've known for a while will come by just to say, "Hey, I just wanted to come by and just sit with you for a little while," or somebody would say, "Hey, I'm going to come and sit next to you at church, and we'll sit there together. Just know that I'm there. If you need anything, just know that I'm there." And those moments were just these reminders from God, letting me know there's community that's
Mhm.
around me. He has placed me in this grove of people that are intertwining their lives with mine. And you don't feel like it when something like this happens. You feel like you're all alone, and you feel like you want to just go into isolation. And again, I think that's the enemy that continues to push that idea in your head. But the Lord has provided this grove of community around me that I can lean on, that they can support me. Um, that's really where I felt his presence the most, is that he had already been working to establish some of these things so that when I needed it the most, I had this like safety net of
Yes.
friendships that was around me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. He knew you needed that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Um, what are some practical, well, no, how can someone tell if their grief is evolving into complicated grief or depression? And what would you recommend they do in that case?
Hmm. It's very difficult to determine as an individual going through grief, because I would say that everyone for those first days, even hours to days, deals with some complicated grief.
Mhm,
Their world is completely shattered and upside down. And so in that time, it's hard to truly evaluate where you're at. But over time, a normal process of grief, or whatever someone would consider a normal process of grief, will have aspects of healing. You will have moments of happiness and joy that comes throughout your day, versus if you get days and weeks and months past the event and you're still can't get out of bed. You still
mhm,
can't find joy in the things that's around you. You still don't want to be around people because you want to be in this sadness, and you don't think that you can be happy again.
mhm, mhm,
Those are the intrusive thoughts that you have to really analyze and understand, why am I feeling this way right now? Why have I not, or rather, not why have I not? Maybe, am I seeing any progress in this? Are there any moments where I do feel a little bit better?
mhm,
Is there a time where, if I cried all day 2 days ago, but yesterday I only cried for half the day? Or, um, I feel like I haven't smiled in a month, but yesterday I found myself laughing at something that a friend said. Like, those are moments where you know that some healing is taking place. And that's a good indicator to know that your grief is processing the way that it should process. But if you continue to stay in that dark cloud, and you stay away from people, you isolate, um, and you're constantly in it day after day after day, weeks and months after the event has occurred, you might want to seek some professional help, because you might be diving into some depression things that needs to be dealt with clinically.
mm. Okay. Um, if someone is grieving the loss of a spouse right now, what would you want to say to their weary heart?
It's hard. Don't think that it's easy. It's that's a given. That's an easy answer. The hard answer is, life can continue.
Mhm.
In those moments, you may not think that it can, and it
You
doesn't
may not
feel like
want
it
it
can,
to.
and you may not want it to either. There's going to be a time where you're going to realize that life has continued, and you are moving on, and you are growing, and you're doing new things where your spouse is not there with you. And that's hard. That's another wave of grief that hits you when you start to see those new events and those new milestones that's now not with the spouse, with the person that you're supposed to be experiencing them with. For example, my daughter just graduated from college in May. So my
Mhm.
wife didn't see her graduate from college. Um, so that was a hard day for us, knowing such a monumental event in her life and her mother wasn't there. But it reminded me of the things that she was there for, because a year before that, she was there at my daughter's wedding, and so we have these wedding pictures with both of us there and just these wonderful memories of when she was there just a few months before she passed away. So there's these big events that happen that your spouse is not gonna be a part of, and those are going to be very difficult. But to know that your life will continue and that you, as long as you cling to God through all of it and you don't run away from God, you don't push God away, because that's really the question that you have when you're grieving someone, especially as close as a spouse. You have two choices. You can either run to God or run away from God. And as long as you're running to God, He's going to show you that path and He's going to continue down that road of where your life is going to progress, and it's going to get easier as you go. And the really important thing is, how is He going to use that experience that you've had now to help not only yourself, but to help others?
Mhm.
In my life, I believe that at some point, I'm, what is it, 10 months away from when my wife passed. I, at some point, am going to have a friend or a family member or just someone close that's going to lose a spouse. And when that happens, I will be able to provide my experience to help them along that journey. So whenever these big moments happen, you have to look back and see, how is God going to continue to use this?
Yeah, that's a really good one to think about. How is God going to use this? Instead of looking for the reason it happened, look for the glory that He's going to get out of it. Um,
Yeah.
he's going to use it for His glory. He's going to make it into something beautiful. Um, so that's good. How can loved ones, church leaders, or friends walk with someone grieving without trying to fix them? And I think I know what you're going to say on this one, but go ahead.
Yeah. It's very much just being present. And not, I think the tendency is when you know somebody that has experienced something that you haven't experienced. So, for example, there's a lot of people in my Sunday school class or at my church that had not lost a spouse.
Mhm,
That's not a super common thing, especially in my age group, to have happened. And I think that sometimes the fear of, well, I don't want to say something wrong. I don't want to get there and say things like, I'm so sorry, or you must feel terrible, knowing that, as you said before, like that person might start thinking, no, you don't. You don't know how I'm feeling because you haven't dealt with this. So there's this tendency, if somebody hasn't experienced it directly, to just try to kind of keep that person at arm's length or to avoid them.
mhm,
I would advise against that. Um, Me, myself, I know that the people in my Sunday school class haven't dealt with losing a spouse. In fact, any person that I would talk with, I know that they still have the ability to talk with their spouse and to eat dinner and to go to bed with their spouse every night. I know that. But that's still, I still had a desire for them to come to me and just say, "Hey, we're here for you. Hey, we want
yeah,
to spend time with you. Hey, we still want you to come around." It was kind of awkward. The majority of the people in my Sunday school class is couples. And so it felt a little strange going back to my Sunday school class knowing that I'm not a couple anymore.
mhm.
So just having people come up to you and get past that fear of, I haven't experienced this directly, but I still love this person and I want to show them that I'm there for them. That's really what the person who's grieving needs.
What's a misconception about grief that you wish you could gently reframe to others?
There's this misconception, I think. Misconception might not be the right word, but a lot of people, when they are dealing with someone who is grieving, try to focus on other things other than the person that they've lost.
Mhm.
Um, when often the person who's grieving would love to talk about, like for me, for example, I would love to talk about my spouse. I would love to talk about Aaron and the things that we did. I don't want somebody to avoid that topic because they're not sure how I'm going to react, or they don't want to make me sad or to see me cry or anything. That oftentimes the person who's grieving wants to talk about that person. They want to
Mhm.
talk about those happy memories. In fact, if you knew them well, it'd be great if you brought up a happy memory for us to share that moment together and remember that and maybe laugh for just a moment. And sure, it might be followed by some tears, but
Yeah.
it's still a moment of remembrance that the griever wants to experience, because that's part of the grieving process. You don't you don't make it through the grieving process by taking all of your grief thoughts and just putting them in a closet and forgetting about them until the end of the day. You have
Mhm.
to process through them, and processing through them with friends is so much more helpful than by yourself.
Yeah, I agree. Um, how do you define joy after loss, not as forgetting, but as honoring love with your life?
Mm. That's hard because there's guilt sometimes that comes with that joy.
Yeah.
You start
That's what I
doing
was gonna
something.
ask as well.
Yeah.
It 'Cause I heard you speaking about your wife and you were like, "Then I didn't have her to play games with." And I wanted to ask you at that time sort of something similar, um, when you are starting to become yourself by yourself, when you're starting to move forward, and you start to find joy in things, is there guilt?
Mm. There certainly is, because your first immediate thought is, I wouldn't be in this situation if she was still here.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be having to deal with this if she hadn't passed away. So you have to frame that first off. You have to frame, all right, this is a new chapter. This is a completely, it looks like my life, but it's different enough to where I have to treat this as something completely different. So when I'm evaluating new experiences, new moments of joy through relationships, through experiences, through whatever that is, my immediate thought is either, man, I wish that my wife Erin was here to experience this, or my immediate thought is, "Uh, I wouldn't be experiencing this had she have passed away, had she not have passed
Mhm.
away."
Mhm.
Um, so you have to get over that piece of it first. But once you're past that, even the first one's okay. Like to say, I wish that she could experience this, is still a little bit of remembrance and knowing that she would enjoy whatever I'm enjoying at the moment. But then the joy that comes on afterwards, once you've kind of processed that first piece, you've kind of put that piece away. Like, Erin's not here to experience this. She would love it, but she's not here to experience this. This is now mine to experience in this moment. And you have a different, it's like a different flavor of joy, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
it does.
Because my joy that was with my wife, it was wonderful. And honestly, I didn't realize how wonderful it was until I didn't have it anymore, because it's just
Mm.
a different type of joy. My joy now is almost like a reminder from God of, there are still joyful things in the world that he's going to continue to present to me.
Mhm.
That's a different level of joy than I experienced with my wife. We had wonderful experiences in our life that I look back on so fondly, and they're just precious, precious moments that we had. But these moments that I have now never would have been possible with my wife, because these are just reminders from God that there is more joy in the world that I have to offer you. Um, even in relationships. I ended up meeting someone, and she is so, so wonderful and so special to me. And it's a relationship that came after such a terrible time in my life,
Mhm.
but she's such a wonderful helper and healer in my process. And the joy that I have in that relationship is constantly overshadowed by the fact of this is happening because my wife passed away and is no longer here. And it's a reminder that God has more joy and more things like this in my future.
So I'm going to get off of my little Q&A and I'm going to ask you uh, something that I'm wondering. When I think about the loss of a spouse, and I cannot empathize with you because I don't know, or, I don't know. I know loss, but the weight is different. Um, do you find in your mental health coaching that when people begin to move on, they almost stop their process on purpose out of guilt of moving on? Does that make sense?
It does. There have been people that I've seen that are afraid to move on. Um, and a lot of that is still just the process of grief. Like you haven't fully processed through the grief. And to be honest, we might never completely process through the grief. Now, I say that from we shouldn't, it's not like every day we're going to be grief stricken.
Hmm.
What I really mean, though, is that there's going to be times where grief is going to peak out once again in our lives, and we have to evaluate it and process it the way that it needs to be processed. But there's people that when that grief hits, when that grief reminds them of, hey, you're not supposed to be feeling joy right now. Hey, you're not really supposed to be advancing your life. You're not supposed to be making these changes that's supposed to be better for you because you should be in a really down, sad place.
Hmm.
People will stop it. People will say, I'm not comfortable taking that step. I'm not comfortable, going out on a limb and starting that new job opportunity. I'm not comfortable in talking to that person, or they could be talking to that person and they abruptly stop it because they're like, I don't want this relationship to advance because I know that I shouldn't be doing this. I should still be grieving. I should still be in my little dark cloud bubble and not moving on with my life. And that's hard. That's your brain that you have to deal with at that point. Um, our brain can tell us all kinds of things and it feels right or wrong based on just what it's telling us, right?
Hmm.
Um, so when you're having to fight those internal battles, the best thing that you can do is ask for God's guidance. If
Yes.
you can say, Lord, what do you have for me in this experience? What do you have for me in this relationship that's
Hmm.
presenting itself?
Hmm.
And if it's of God and if God is giving you peace about it, by all means continue forward because it could just be a wonderful gift that God is trying to give you on your journey, on this grief journey that you're taking
Yeah.
to help you through. Um, and a lot of people will stifle that because they'll say, I understand that this sounds like a great opportunity. This is kind of lining up perfectly, and I don't know how it's happening, which usually ends up meaning that it's a God thing when it's lining up perfectly and you don't know why it's going on.
Yeah.
So they'll say, but I'm not going to take that step because I should be in this little bubble that I'm in. Um, you really need to seek after God in that and have Him guide you because He's not going to. I can almost guarantee you, He's not going to say, no, I don't want you to do that. I'd really like for you to stay at home and just lay in bed and cry for the next couple of days. That's
Yeah.
usually not the way that God works. It's not the way God wants us to heal and process.
And I think honoring the one that you lost is allowing yourself to feel joy again. Because
Yeah.
if you loved them and they loved you, would you want them to stay in that state and not move
Right.
on if you passed away? So you need to think about it the same way. To honor them in reality, you're not forgetting them. You know what I mean? Like you moving on is not forgetting them and it's not hurting them. It's just hurting yourself. And that's not
Yeah.
what your loved one would want for you.
Yeah. Exactly. I heard a wonderful story. It's not biblical, but it
Mhm.
it describes this very well. A man was married to a woman, and the man died. And the woman said, I'm going to mourn this loss forever. I'm never going to get remarried." And throughout time, there would be a man that would come into her life through her church or through whatever, and she would say, I'm not going to get remarried. I can't do that. I love my husband, and he's gone. I'm just not going to do that. And continued to live on for 20, 30 years before she ended up passing away. Finally, when
Mm.
she passed away and she went to heaven, her husband said,
You still there? Oh, I apologize to our listeners. We seem to have lost connection. Um, you got to the point where you said she went to heaven and her husband said,
yeah, her husband said, why did you not take all these opportunities that God gave you to be with someone and enjoy those last years of your life with someone else and not be lonely and be by yourself? And she said,
Mhm,
well, I loved you and I didn't want anyone but you. And he said, I would have rather you have lived your life to the fullest while you were there, and then we could be together when you're in heaven. So it was just, I mean, it's not biblical, but it's just a reminder of the
mhm,
fact that if your loved one was still here, chances are that person is not going to want you to sit here and be lonely for the rest of your life, which could be years or decades in my case later, Lord willing. I'm going to live another 40 to 50 years from now. I'm going to live longer than my relationship that I have with my wife. So I'm sure that she wouldn't look at me and say, I don't want you to move on. I want you to sit here and be lonely for the rest of your life until we're together again. That's just not, she's in perfection right now. So I feel like when you're in this moment, you have to look and evaluate and say, not only what would they want for me, because that's a good guidance, but also like, what does the Lord want from me?
mhm.
And and the Lord doesn't want us to be alone. I mean, starting in the beginning of the Bible, he didn't like the fact that Adam was alone. It wasn't good for him to be alone, so he made Eve. Man is not made to be alone, especially for long
Right.
lengths of time like that.
Yeah, I agree. Um, how can grief expand our capacity for compassion, connection, or even calling?
The interesting thing about grief is that everyone will experience it at some point. It doesn't matter how connected or not connected you are to family or friends or whatever, you're going to experience grief at some level in your
Mhm,
life. Depending on how that grief comes about, changes your perspective of everyone around you. For example, I lost a spouse. For the rest of my life, I now know what it means to lose a spouse, and I'm going to have more compassion when I hear that someone has lost a spouse versus before this happened to me. Before it happened to me, oh, it's tragic. It's terrible. I can't believe that. That's awful. But immediately I go on into my life the way that my life has been going. But if I hear about it now, I know what they're going through. I know what those first few days and weeks is like. It's a different level of compassion that I have for that person. Same way I would imagine if someone loses a child. I can't fathom that. I haven't dealt with that. I have
mhm,
compassion for that person, but I
mhm.
haven't lived it, so I don't know it as well as someone else who's lost a child. So grief changes your perspective based on how you have experienced it, and it allows your compassion to grow for those who are experiencing it, something that you've already experienced.
Yeah. Um, if someone is going through it or they'd like to speak with you further on it, how can they get a hold of you?
So at my website, which is whitmancollective.com, I have a form there that you can fill out and it sends me directly to an email and I can contact you. We can set up a meeting to discuss and see kind of what kind of help that you're looking for, what kind of stages of life that you're going through and dealing with, and work on putting together a plan to continue to talk. But ultimately, just if you just want to reach out, if you just need somebody to listen, I'm here to listen. I have specific experience of dealing with the loss of a spouse. So any of that, I'm happy to hear and just be an ear for someone.
So it was Whitman, which is Whitman, and collective.
Yes, COLLECTIVE.com.
Okay, .com. I'm putting it in the chat so that way, once we close out, it's on the streams that remain on the pages. But I would love it for you to send me the links that you want to have, and I'll put them in the description of
Sure.
all of the posts. So, okay, is there anything else you would like to say before we close out?
No, just know that when you're going through grief, it may feel like you're alone, but God is going to place other people in your life, whether that be through family members, through friends, through church members, church family. There are other people that you have to lean on. It may feel like you're alone, but sometimes other people just don't know exactly what to say. And
Mhm.
that's all right, because just let them know you just need to be with somebody. You just need to for them to tell you, "Hey, I'm here with you," and spend that time together. Just don't stay in isolation. That will really hurt you in the long run.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being on and sharing this with us. Um, to all of our listeners, if you want to get up with Troy Whitman, it's whitmancollective.com. And just you can also reach out to me if for some reason you can't find him. It's boundbygracepodcast.com. All right. I hope you guys found help in this, and I hope this is a blessing to those that really need to hear it. You guys have a wonderful day. And again, I appreciate you being on and sharing this with us. Bye.
Thank you so much.